Welcome to Here She Stands, the podcast where Lutheran women from across Australia come together as a community to encourage one another in the gospel. At Here She Stands, we invite Lutheran men and women from Australia and around the world who've been strengthened by the abundant riches of God's grace to share their gifts to guide, help, and encourage Lutheran women in Australia. As we learn from their stories, theological insights, and creative gifts, we pray that the lives of Lutheran women will be enriched as they continue the conversation and consolation with each other, growing in faith in God and in love for those they serve. We do this so that when the trials of this world push us down, we can hold fast to the Word of God and confidently say, "Here I stand, I can do no other."
Welcome to another episode of Here She Stands. Today we are joined by another sister in Christ, Christa Petzold. Christa lives in Antioch, Illinois. She is married to Jonathan, an LCMS pastor. She is a homeschool mum of 4 children, and her education includes a bachelor's degree in mathematics and Lutheran secondary education. She has a master's degree in theology from Concordia University in Irvine. She's currently pursuing a PhD in history of exegesis from Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. And to add to that, she has authored and co-authored a few books, including Journey Through Church History, which is a church history curriculum, Gathered by Christ, The Overlooked Gift of the Church, and she co-authored Male and Female, Embracing Your Role in God's Design with her husband, Jonathan. In today's episode, however, we are talking to Christa about New Augsburg, which is the fiction trilogy that she has written and published. And we will also look into the place that fiction has in the life of the church. So, Christa, thank you so much for joining us on Here She Stands.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we are also joined by my co-host, Sonia.
Hello, it's lovely to meet you, Christa. After having started reading your book, I'm very excited to keep reading it. So you have written and published the first 2 books of the New Augsburg Trilogy. How is your 3rd book going at the moment?
So the 3rd book is written and I am editing it. It's been through several rounds of edits and copy edits start next month. So working on the cover as well. So I'm hoping for an early summer release date for that one. Maybe May or June.
Yeah. And for those of our listeners who haven't read New Augsburg yet, without revealing any spoilers, what is New Augsburg about?
So New Augsburg is... Thematically, New Augsburg is about sort of the paradoxical beauty and challenge of life lived in Christian community or in the church. But the setting of New Augsburg is a small town in northern Wisconsin, founded around our own time. So I'm imagining it founded like now in the 2020s. But the story itself takes place 100 years in the future. So in the 2117 is when it opens at the 600th anniversary of the Reformation. And the story follows Lydia. She's 22 or so at the beginning of the story. She's grown up in this very isolated town, which is a bit of a Christian bubble, if you will. And in this particular town, property is inherited and passed down generationally to avoid oversight from a hostile secular government. And so Lydia's parents are both gone when the story opens, and her brother is not interested in living in New Augsburg and running the printing press, which her family owns. And they run this press to print books and Bibles and theological works to pass on the faith to the church. And so she's kind of alone in that, but she can't inherit the press. And so she's left in this kind of tricky situation. So that's kind of the premise. Yeah. The premise came to me after taking a class on Christian community and reading The Benedict Option by Rod Dreher. So it's I'll note, I don't endorse everything about the way New Augsburg is set up as a community. It's sort of a thought experiment and a fictional setting that has both its strengths and weaknesses. So
That's actually one of the things I really appreciated about New Augsburg is that you didn't romanticize this confessional Lutheran community, but you also showed the weaknesses of it and some of the problems that were going on inside the community.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah.
if it was real life, there would always be problems, no matter how hard we tried. So that's quite realistic.
Yes, right. So, like, Christian communities are never perfect, and sometimes they're really, really nice, and they're going pretty well. And even in those moments, there are pockets of real problems because of sin. And so, yeah, that was definitely important to me to kind of like have that realness to it.
Yes. Did you want to also give a little bit of an overview about the second book as well?
Sure. So in the first book, it's centered on Lydia and what she, it is a romance. The main plot line is a romance. And in book 2, there is romance as well. So book 2, we switch to Micah, who is Lydia's brother, and he kind of has a plot line that takes the readers out of New Augsburg and sees what the rest of the world is like at the time, because he's dating or is engaged at the beginning of the story to a Christian young lady who is not from New Augsburg and has these political ambitions. And so her life path there's some conflict that comes up with their values and her career trajectory. And then also some other things that happen in the world that sort of bring these conflicts home to New Augsburg, and the community there has to grapple with them a little bit.
So writing a novel, let alone a trilogy, is a massive undertaking. What inspired you to take on such a big project?
Well, so I had already written a couple of other books, and I was really loving writing. I never really thought about, I thought about writing fiction when I was a kid, but I didn't like seriously think about it. And then we live in a time when, like, as many Christians look to the future, or even to the time we currently live in, there's a lot of concerns about the way the world is going, right? And secularism and shifting cultural values and things. And when I wrote Gathered by Christ, I wrote that book wanting to highlight the comfort and beauty of the church in a time when institutional religion is sort of not seen as beautiful or comforting in general. And as I kind of wrapped up writing that book, I was also reading fiction. And I read a novel, which it's not like explicitly a Christian novel, but the romance in that novel was really excellent and just drew me in. And I thought it was really lovely. And there was something very sacrificial about the male lead. And I had this kind of moment, which felt like an aha moment, but might be kind of obvious, that all good romances work and resonate because they are a picture of Christ and the church to some extent. They kind of hint us at that truth. And so then I also had the experience of talking to some ladies at like church related events and telling them I had written a book, and they said, "Oh, I only read fiction." And I said, okay. So I read this beautiful novel and I loved it. And then I also knew that like this message of like the hope and the beauty of the church that I wanted to communicate, that not everybody reads nonfiction, and that's not the best way to reach everybody. And I just thought, I wonder if I can do it in a story, that would be so cool and it would be powerful. And so then I started like thinking about novel writing, and I did a bunch of research on story structure, and I started making lists of like my favorite books and my favorite stories and the things that makes those stories resonate for me and work, and kind of went from there. And the premise kind of came to me kind of separately from that. So yeah, it just all kind of came together. And I didn't know it was going to be a trilogy. I thought it would be a single novel. But I think I was only like halfway into the first book when I realized it was a trilogy, because there were stories for the other characters, because you write these characters and you want them to be three-dimensional. And so even though the reader might not know what's going on in their head and might be like really irritated with Mike, for example, I understand why he's doing that as the author. And I want to write his story too, because I want him to have a growth arc as well. And so then the other two books like were in my head as I was working on the first one, and just kind of came together, I guess.
So before you started writing the books, you did a little bit of planning. but
Mhm.
then you just let the story take shape as you were writing it.
Yeah, I mean, I plot my stories. So some people just kind of jump in. I did have like a full outline for the first book before I started writing it, but it changes a little bit as you go. So for me, I usually like end up writing. I have a full plot, full outline, but then halfway through, I kind of have to stop and rework it because I know the characters better now, and I've found some issues that are going to need like different things. And so it's planned out, but it's also like a bit of discovery as you go, I think.
Yes.
It's really interesting. I really like the map that you drew at the start of the book. It
Yeah.
being sort of quite a visual, like I need to have pictures and images. I don't have them in my head. That already really helped me.
My friend Elaine did the artwork, so I have to credit her. She did the map. I did a map when I was starting. Like before I started writing, I drew a map, but then I gave it to her, and she did a nice copy for inside the book for me. So
yeah, that's really nice. I like that.
But I don't think I could have written it without a map. I need to know where things are.
It was a really nice touch to the book. I read both books, and I wanted to just share with you some of the things that I really appreciated about the first two books. So the first one I already said about how the confessional Lutheran community is not romanticized or portrayed through rose-colored glasses. You didn't portray it as like the ultimate idealistic community. I also really appreciated the struggle in New Augsburg. This is what I saw. This is what I found. New Augsburg was founded so that they could live a life of confession to the Lord. And as confessional Lutherans, we desire to live a life of piety and to live a life that is honoring to the Lord. But there's always that line, that tension of our piety can sometimes become a little bit pietistic. And I found that in the first book, there were a few little hints here and there of that little struggle that we have. And I really did appreciate that. And I also, it is a romance novel, and I did appreciate the mature wisdom that you brought into the book around relationships and romance and getting married, especially from one of the older characters who becomes a bit of a mentor or an older figure, an older woman figure in Lydia's life. And I appreciated the wisdom that she gave, which is certainly helpful because not all romance books have that. Some of it can kind of portray a bit of a romanticized picture of romance. And I think the last thing that I did appreciate about the second book was that you were quite realistic with the dystopian government. And because I have seen some futuristic novels and movies, and it's not exactly believable, but you made it very realistic. And to be honest, I think it unlocked some new fears for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of ironic because what I hope that people take away when they read it is actually, well, first of all, like I want it to be fun, to be a fun read. And so I put in all the things that I really love in stories, like some politics, some dances, some like sort of tense conversations, and like the hint of dystopian and all of that. And stronger in the second book too. But I wanted it to be kind of hopeful. And I think a part of doing that is trying to portray like the negatives in a realistic way. But sort of the beautiful thing is that even though like maybe there's some really negative things that happen from like a government perspective, that the church is going to be fine in a sense. Even if it doesn't look like it's fine, it's there. And so that's kind of ultimately the message of the book.
And I found that really did come out, how the church kept going, life kept going, and things kept going within the story, even though the government was doing this and that, and all this was going on. And yes, you definitely portrayed that hope in the book.
It's funny you say you wrote the book for people who only read fiction, whereas I'm someone who mostly just reads non-fiction because I don't know, I feel like that's a good use of my time, and I just I don't really get into fiction very much. I don't know why. And I always think, it would be nice to, be able to read a little bit of fiction and just put myself in another world and that kind of stuff. So your book is going to do the opposite for me. It's going to help me read some fiction because it's based on a lot of, realism. So I'm looking forward to that.
I've been through seasons of my life where I read mostly nonfiction, and then times when I read more fiction. And I think they're both so important, in different ways.
So you have written some nonfiction books, and they've all been published by Concordia Publishing House. And it's very easy to see how nonfiction fits into the life of the church. So what about fiction? Where does that fit in with edifying the church? And is there a purpose and a place for it in the church?
Yeah. So first of all, like on a really obvious level, what is available and being published right now? If the church wants good fiction, we're going to have to write it ourselves, right? Because we're at such a different place from the rest of the world in terms of recognizing what truth is and what is good and good versus evil, that we really are not going to be able to resonate with the stories that are being written outside the church completely. Now, I say that, but at the same time, I do read books written by non-Christians. I enjoy art created by non-Christians because anytime that somebody expresses something true, it's true because all truth comes from God. However, we have the gospel. And so we want to put it into our art and make that part of the art that is out there and that's available to people. I think fiction is really important, first of all, just because people love stories and we're kind of designed as story people. We think about our own life in terms of story. Stories resonate with us and engage us on like an emotional level in a way that nonfiction is not designed to communicate. And I think both are really good and important. And I read a lot of nonfiction, obviously, and a good amount of fiction. I think nonfiction encourages us to like detach emotionally and to be objective and analytical and to absorb new information, which is very important. But fiction does kind of the reverse. It helps us synthesize what we've already observed in life in new ways. It helps us make sense of our own experiences and make connections that we hadn't made before. And it builds empathy for people and situations that we haven't met or haven't experienced. It helps us to see the world through other people's eyes. Yeah. So when I wrote New Augsburg, I intentionally wrote a story set in the future that feels like the past because I wanted to kind of challenge or subvert the dystopian genre a little bit. So dystopia is usually set in the future and it's cynical, right? It's built on detecting what is wrong with the world we live in and either suggesting a course correction or just pointing out like issues, right? Or like the sin of human nature. It breaks down the world and highlights the dark places. That's what dystopia does. And Christians, we're pretty good at that. Like we can look around our world and we can be like, that's wrong and that's wrong and that's wrong. But I wanted to do the inverse of that and like look at the world, which is dark, and point out the light places, if that makes sense. So I set my story in a way that feels on the surface like it's going to be dystopian, but it's about recognizing that no matter the setting, the church continues to exist. And despite its flaws and challenges, the church is beautiful because it's washed in the blood of Christ. So yeah, if dystopian writing is about like seeing the darkness in the world, the New Augsburg is about seeing the light or the hope of the church right here, like imperfections and all, right now in the messy world we live in, and reminding the readers that the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. And the church is going to be here until Jesus returns because he has promised that no matter what it looks like out there in the world. And like church history, when you study church history, you see times when it looked pretty bleak, like this is not the first time in history when Christians have had to give things up for their confession of faith, right? It's not the first time and it won't be the last time. And some centuries will be better than others but all are going to be sort of the same in a sense until Christ returns. So yeah, so in Gathered by Christ, I talked in one of the chapters about like how the church has a hope to share with the world and how one of the things that really helps the church grow in the early church there's like a citation for this and I wish I had it, but like a coherent eschatology, like really understanding what the hope is that we have to communicate to the world. And so I kind of am hoping, as in this book, to provide that encouragement and to shape the thinking of the readers into this more positive way to see like what Christ is doing through his church in the world. But it's fiction and it's fun. And we also just have a need to have something our young people can read that is fun and clean and light and enjoyable and that is true, you know?
Exactly. I was going to say, I'm really happy that you're creating these things that I look forward to my daughters one day when they're teenagers to be able to read and to sort of just feel like what we teach and we believe is just normal, like normal everyday conversation, normal everyday life. And that, because if you read anything else out there, it's very different.
Yeah.
So they would feel abnormal and they would feel like they're so different and everyone else is different to them. And it would be nice if there's lots of these sorts of books that they can read and just feel like it's normal and they're normal. And, yeah.
That's one of the reasons I did the Journey Through Church History book, is because I wanted young people to like tap into the greater culture of all of church history and like the family of God throughout time and space, you know, like no matter what country you live in or what century you live in, the Christian church is the Christian church, and that's really beautiful. Yeah. So yeah, this is a book I would have loved to read as a teenager, and I hope that like young people will enjoy it too. So
yes. So you've used fiction as the medium to encourage the church and to platform the truth that the church triumphant will continue because it has been washed in the blood of Christ and it is his church. And yeah, I think just after reading your book, I've been thinking a lot about fiction, and Jesus used fiction. His parables, fiction. He used fiction to teach. In many ways, you have certainly used New Augsburg to teach and encourage. I certainly think there is a need for Lutheran fiction because the author's theology and the author's worldview certainly comes out in their writing. And it would be wonderful to see more Lutheran fiction. I know this wasn't in the questions, but are there any other Lutheran fiction authors that you can recommend?
Yes. There's not as many as I would love to see. And I feel nervous about beginning to recommend because I don't want to leave anybody out of the list.
Would you be interested in, after the interview, just writing up a few that you can remember and we can just include it in the show notes?
Yeah. Yes. Let's do that. Because I don't want to pronounce anyone's name wrong or like forget somebody or something.
That would be a good thing to add to our website as well under book resources.
Yeah, yes. I know Katie Schurman is the main name that comes to mind, but she's not the only one. There's a number of others. It would be really nice to kind of gather the Lutheran fiction writers together and have like a good list somewhere so that people could find them.
Yeah.
So what encouragement and advice do you have for Lutherans who are thinking of writing fiction?
Yeah, so I do think Lutheran fiction, we can always use more of it. So I think definitely go for it. If you want to write fiction, give it a try. It's hard in a sense, like there's a discipline to it, like anything else. But, you know, in terms of what I love about Lutheran fiction is the emphasis on what God does for us, you know, instead of what we do for God. And so I know often when I'm reading Christian fiction, it pulls me out if at the end of the story, there's this like big decision theology moment, you know, where it's like the whole story's been building and then the character like makes a decision. And then that's like the third act finale, you know? And so I think that like Lutherans have just such a beautiful theology and it's so Christ-centered and cross-centered, and I want to see more of it in my stories. So I think that would be great to have more Lutheran fiction. So, I mean, just in terms of writing advice, like you have to read a lot and you have to write a lot. Like there's no shortcuts for those things. Read a lot of books and then write something every day. And like read broadly and read in different genres And what I did is kind of like I said earlier, I wrote down like my top 5 or 10 favorite stories of all time. And some of them were books and a few of them were movies. And I wrote down who my favorite characters are and why. Like, what about those stories spoke to me? And kind of like, so taking some time to think about what you love in fiction. And I mean, one of the really important things about growing as a writer is seeking out feedback and learning from other people, right? Like letting people read your writing and give you honest criticism, which is very difficult, but it's a really important skill, like working with editors and getting criticism and growing. But the more you do it, the easier it gets to hear the truth about your own writing. And one thing that I'm also kind of starting to be able to do is like, then you get to a point where you have to be able to discern like which feedback is really what you believe as well and is really helpful. And so you have to kind of, even if you get feedback that you end up disagreeing with, it helps clarify for you like, oh no, I disagree with that because this is something I'm very confident about that I want to express in this way in my writing. So it can kind of help you find your unique voice and what you're bringing to the table. Yeah, so I would say it's kind of a dance between being humble and open to learning from others, which is really important. And also crafting your own sense of what you believe about what it makes a book good and learning how to discern sort of the helpful critique from what you don't agree with or what's not particularly pertinent to you. And it's kind of a balancing act between like striving for excellence in everything we do because we do everything we do for the Lord, but also not being crippled by like pride and like fear that if we're imperfect, that's bad. Like we are imperfect. That's okay. And if you can write a novel that may not be the perfect novel, but has something to say, that's still better than not doing it at all. So not letting that fear of not being perfect kind of hold you back. Yeah, I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts, but it's a process, and like there's always more to learn about writing and about anything. That you do. So,
yes. And are you planning on writing more fiction once the new Augsburg trilogy is finished and published and complete?
I really want to. I don't have anything specific planned or prepared to announce or anything like that. I have like a handful of ideas and they're all really different and they're all in different genres. And I'm really bad at marketing because I can't ever just like do something because I know it would sell well. I have to do something that like I really want to do, and that communicates something I want to say. And so I don't know what I'll do next, but I discovered a lot of joy through writing New Augsburg. I didn't realize how much fun writing fiction was going to be, and it's kind of addictive. And I would be really surprised if I didn't write more because it's just so great. I don't know. I'm just loving it so much. So I'll have to do something. Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. And where can people find you? Where can our listeners find you and buy New Augsburg?
Sure. So New Augsburg is on Amazon, so it's easy to find there. I know that you have it available too. I don't know. Is it on your website for people to buy or?
Not yet.
Oh, sorry.
We're still working to set that up.
Okay. All right.
But hopefully soon we'll be able to have it available for people to purchase. So
it's on Amazon and it's on probably from some other booksellers too. I have a website, which is just my name, ChristaPetzold.com. You can find more about my books there or contact me. And I'm on Instagram pretty regularly. So can you find me there?
Yes. I was going to say, once I've got a more permanent home, it will hopefully have the website up again. But if someone would like me to send them 1 or 2 copies, they can also send us a message and I'd be happy to do that.
So, Christa, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about New Augsburg and giving encouragement to any Lutheran out there who is wanting to get into writing fiction. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been so fun. It's always fun to talk about New Augsburg. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to keep the conversation going or are seeking further encouragement, please visit our website and our new blog at hereshstands.online. Here She Stands is an Australian podcast for Lutheran women, and we release new episodes every 3 weeks on a Tuesday. You can find us on all major podcasting platforms as well as YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. If you would like to contact us directly, our email address is hereshestands.podcast@gmail.com. Until next time, we pray that you will hold fast to God's word and confidently stand and say, "Here I stand, I can do no other."